Okay, so you want to own a truck dealership. Buy some land, put up a showroom, order a few dozen trucks, hire some salespeople, and watch them drive off the lot one by one. That's the picture in most people's heads. Land, trucks, sales, profit. Here's the number that breaks that picture completely. A dealership can sell a truck worth $108,000 and make less money on that single sale than it makes just changing that same truck's oil over the next several years. That sounds backwards. It isn't. It's exactly how the business is built to work. Most people assume a truck dealership is, at its core, a truck-selling business. It isn't. The truck is barely the product. The truck is the bait that gets a much bigger machine started. Before we get into why, you need to understand why these places even exist in the first place. The company that actually builds the truck almost never sells it to you directly. Peterbilt doesn't sell you a truck. Freightliner doesn't sell you a truck. Volvo and Mack don't sell you a truck. International doesn't sell you a truck. They manufacture it and then hand it off to a separate independently owned dealership to sell, finance, repair, and stock parts sometimes for 15 years after that truck first rolls off the line. Why would a manufacturer give up that much control? Because for the buyer, a broken down truck isn't an inconvenience. It's a financial emergency. A trucking company loses real money for every hour that truck sits still instead of hauling freight. So buyers don't just want a vehicle. They want a nearby repair shop, a wall of spare parts on standby, and a technician who can fix the problem today, not next week. Building that kind of local infrastructure everywhere, for every truck they've ever sold, would bury a manufacturer in real estate, payroll, and regional risk. So instead, they hand that entire job to independent operators. In exchange, the manufacturer usually grants that dealer exclusive rights to sell their brand across a defined territory, and state franchise laws back that exclusivity up. But if the manufacturer needs the dealer this badly just to function in a local market, who actually holds the power in that relationship? Hold on to that question, because the answer flips depending on whose year it's been. In a strong year, the manufacturer holds the leverage. They control the supply of new trucks, they set the pricing tiers, and they can steer the most desirable inventory toward whichever dealers are hitting their sales targets. But in a weak year, that power flips almost completely. The manufacturer can't sell a single truck in that territory without the dealer's showroom, its service bays, and its local reputation already built up over years. A factory sitting in another state can't fix a broken axle on a highway at 2 in the morning, and it certainly can't do it for a trucking company that's losing money for every hour that truck sits parked on the shoulder. Only the local dealer, with a physical shop and a technician nearby, can actually solve that problem. That mutual dependency is exactly why franchise protection laws exist in nearly every state, preventing manufacturers from simply cutting out an underperforming dealer and opening a factory-owned store right next door. Now let's talk about what it actually costs to open one of these places, because it is nowhere close to what people picture. You need somewhere between 10 and 25 acres of reinforced heavy-load pavement, engineered to hold vehicles that weigh over 80,000 pounds without cracking apart underneath them. And on that land, the showroom is basically decoration. The real structure is a repair facility with anywhere from 15 to 40 service bays, overhead bridge cranes, heavy-duty lifts, and diagnostic computers that are often locked to one single manufacturer's proprietary software. Let's run the actual math out loud, because the total surprises almost everyone. Land alone runs $5 to $12 million. Construction of the buildings and service bays runs $7 to $18 million. Diagnostic tools and specialized shop equipment add another $1.5 to $3.5 million. Before a single truck has been sold, you also need $2 to $5 million sitting in parts inventory on the shelves. That parts inventory alone typically has to cover somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 distinct individual components, spanning engines, drivetrains, and brake systems, before the parts counter can even claim to be a reliable option for a fleet in a hurry. On top of that, you need cash reserves in the range of $2 to $4 million just to cover payroll and insurance while the business finds its footing. Add it all together, and total startup capital lands somewhere between $18 million and $44 million, spent before a single truck has ever changed hands, and before a single dollar in profit has come back through the door. On top of all that, manufacturers enforce something called an image program, a strict set of rules dictating exactly what the building has to look like, how many service bays it needs relative to the size of the territory, and which specific components have to be kept in stock at all times. These aren't gentle suggestions. Falling out of compliance with an image program can put a dealer's entire franchise agreement at risk, which means the manufacturer effectively controls how the building looks and operates for as long as that franchise exists, even though the manufacturer never paid a cent toward constructing it. And here's the twist almost nobody warns you about going in. Even after spending tens of millions of dollars to build the place, the trucks sitting out on the lot still aren't fully paid for. This is where most outsiders get confused. A single new commercial truck costs somewhere between $120,000 and $190,000 at wholesale. Multiply that across a lot holding 50 to 100 trucks, and you'd need $6 to $19 million in pure cash just to own that inventory outright. Almost no dealership does that. Instead, they use something called floor plan financing. A bank, or the manufacturer's own in-house lending arm, such as Packard Financial or Daimler Truck Financial Services, pays for the truck the second it leaves the factory. The dealership takes physical delivery, parks it on the lot, and then pays interest on that loan every single day the truck sits there unsold. Let's do the math on one truck. A vehicle worth $160,000, financed at roughly 7.5%, cost the dealership almost $33 a day in interest alone, just to exist on the lot doing nothing. Leave it there for 4 months, 120 days, and you've quietly burned through close to $4,000, which can wipe out most of the profit that truck was ever going to generate, and it gets worse the longer it sits. Lenders force something called curtailment payments, which require the dealer to pay down about 10% of a truck's value every 30 days once it passes 9 to 120 days unsold. So an unsold truck isn't just sitting there looking optimistic on the lot. It's actively draining cash out of the business, one day at a time. The longer a truck sits, the more dangerous it becomes. Now here's the number that actually changes how you see this whole industry. Look at the income statements of the big publicly traded dealership groups, and new truck sales bring in roughly 45 to 55% of total revenue, sometimes over half the money coming through the door. But that same new truck department produces only 12 to 18% of total profit. Half the revenue, less than a fifth of the profit. The math simply doesn't line up, and that gap is the entire story of this business. If you're finding this breakdown genuinely interesting so far, take a second to hit subscribe and like the video, because the strangest part of this business is still ahead of us. So if trucks aren't the moneymaker, what is? Start with financing. When a customer buys a truck on credit, dealership almost never lends the money itself. It acts as a broker sitting between the buyer and a commercial lending company. The lender quotes the dealership a wholesale interest rate, let's say 7%. That's called the buy rate. The dealership's finance office then negotiates a slightly higher rate with the customer, say 8.5%. That's the sell rate. The gap between those two numbers, about 1.5%, gets calculated across the entire length of the loan, often 4 to 6 years, and paid to the dealership up front, in cash, the moment the deal closes. Because arranging that spread costs the dealership almost nothing, profit margins on financing regularly land between 85 and 98%. A single financing deal can generate $3,000 to $8,000 in pure profit, and that's frequently more money than the truck itself made. But financing still isn't the biggest secret in the building. Sitting right alongside every loan, the finance office sells extended coverage. Commercial trucks rack up 100,000 to 150,000 miles a year, and a major failure in the engine or the emissions system outside of factory warranty can cost $20,000 to $40,000 to repair. So buyers pay for extended protection plans covering the engine and the emissions equipment. They also buy something called guaranteed asset protection, which covers the difference if the truck is totaled and the insurance payout doesn't fully cover what's still owed on the loan. Margins on these protection products routinely clear 60 to 75%. None of this is a scam from the buyer's side. It genuinely protects them from a 5-figure repair bill. It just also happens to be some of the most profitable paperwork in the entire dealership. The finance office doesn't stop at protection plans either. It also sells physical add-ons, auxiliary power units that let a driver run the cab's electronics overnight without idling the engine, custom aerodynamic fairings that improve fuel economy on long highway runs, and telematics hardware that tracks the truck's location and engine health in real time. That last one matters more than it sounds. The moment a telematics sensor detects a warning code, it can automatically notify the dealership's own service department before the driver even realizes something is wrong, quietly directing that future repair job straight back to the shop that sold the truck in the first place. Now we get to the department that actually keeps the lights on, service. While new truck sales rise and fall with the broader economy, repair demand almost never fully stops, because trucks that are working have to keep working. The dealership charges customers somewhere between $160 and $250 an hour for labor, while paying its own technicians $35 to $55 an hour to actually do the work. That gap alone produces gross margins of 65 to 75%. Before you even count overhead, there's a second trick layered right on top of that first one. Repairs are billed using standardized manufacturer time guides, called flat-rate manuals. If the guide says a repair officially takes 4 hours and an experienced technician finishes the job in 2.5, the dealership still bills the customer for 4 full hours of labor, while only paying the technician for the 2.5 hours actually worked. That gap is pure profit, repeated across every job, every single day, for every technician on the floor. There's a third stream feeding the same bays: warranty work. When a truck breaks down under factory warranty, the manufacturer, not the customer, pays for the repair. The negotiated warranty labor rate usually runs a little lower than the full retail rate charged to a walk-in customer, but it comes with something just as valuable: guaranteed volume. Warranty repairs keep bays busy and keep parts moving even in slow months, and every warranty job still pulls the customer back into that same building for years of future service, long after the original coverage has expired. There's a single number that tells you whether a dealership is genuinely healthy, and it's called the absorption rate. It measures whether the profit generated purely from service, parts, and collision repair is enough by itself to cover the entire company's fixed overhead. Every salary, the mortgage or lease on the property, insurance, taxes, utilities, all of it. The formula is simple. Take total fixed overhead, divide it by the combined gross profit from service, parts, and collision work, and multiply by 100. The strongest dealership groups in the country, names like Rush Enterprises, run absorption rates between 125 and 136%. That means the repair shop and parts counter alone generate more than enough profit to pay every single bill in the building, with room to spare, before a single new truck sale even counts toward the bottom line. At that point, truck sales stop being the business and start being a bonus sitting on top of it. A truck sold once can generate revenue for a decade after it leaves the lot. Sitting next to the service bays is the parts counter, and it behaves less like a retail shop and more like a regional distribution warehouse. Trucks constantly need brake pads, filters, sensors, and injectors replaced, and because downtime is so expensive for a trucking company, buyers care far more about getting the right part today than saving a few dollars shopping around for a slightly cheaper one somewhere else. Dealerships holding exclusive rights to a manufacturer's parts effectively become the only fast option for miles around. That pricing power produces margins of 28 to 36% on inventory that turns over constantly rather than sitting on a shelf. It's quiet, it's unglamorous, and it's one of the most reliably profitable corners of the entire operation. The parts counter actually serves 3 separate customers at once, and each one feeds the others. First, it supplies the dealership's own technicians working on repair orders inside the building. Second, it sells directly over the counter to independent repair shops and owner-operators who'd rather buy the part locally than wait for a shipment. Third, many dealerships run their own delivery vans, driving parts straight out to major fleet maintenance yards across the region, sometimes multiple times a day. That third channel alone can turn a single parts department into the fastest, most reliable supplier for every independent mechanic in the area, without that mechanic ever setting foot in the showroom. Used trucks are where things get genuinely interesting, because unlike new trucks, the price isn't dictated by a manufacturer's fixed invoice. When a fleet trades in a batch of 4 to 6-year-old trucks for brand new ones, the dealership's appraisers value those trade-ins conservatively, factoring in wear, tires, and resale risk. Those trucks then pass through the dealership's own service bays for reconditioning and safety certification, which means the dealership captures internal profit at the repair stage before the truck is ever offered for sale again. Once it's back on the lot looking retail-ready, it sells to owner-operators or smaller regional fleets. Because profit gets captured twice, once in reconditioning and once at resale, used truck margins routinely land between 10 and 18%, comfortably beating what that same dealership typically makes on a brand new unit. Not every trade-in ends up on the retail lot either. Units that don't fit the local market get pushed through wholesale channels or digital auctions instead, which lets a dealership manage its used inventory levels actively rather than being stuck holding trucks nobody nearby wants to buy. Then there are fleet customers, and this is where the entire scale of the business changes. A construction company, a logistics firm, or a city government might operate anywhere from 20 trucks to well over 1,000. Land one fleet contract for 100 trucks, and you've just created a single customer that needs somewhere between $1.5 and $2.5 million a year in ongoing maintenance and replacement parts, completely on top of the original sale. Many of these relationships come wrapped in contract maintenance agreements, billed by the mile, something like 12 cents per operating mile, which guarantees steady, predictable cash flow into the service bays for years at a time. And once a fleet's operations are plugged into a dealership's parts delivery system, telematics and repair scheduling, switching to a competing dealer becomes genuinely disruptive to their entire business. Every driver has to learn a new service location, every maintenance record has to transfer over, and every billing arrangement has to be renegotiated from scratch. That friction is exactly why fleets tend to stay put for a very long time, sometimes for the entire operational life of the vehicles themselves. Landing a 100-truck fleet account isn't really a single sale. It's closer to signing a decade-long subscription that happens to start with a truck changing hands. There's also a layer of money moving behind the scenes that customers never see or even know exists. Manufacturers build a hidden allowance, usually 2 to 3% of a truck's invoice price, directly into what they charge the dealer, and then quietly refund that amount to the dealer once the truck actually sells. It functions as forced savings, guaranteeing the dealer a baseline profit even on a truck sold at a razor-thin sticker price. On top of that, manufacturers run tiered volume bonuses. Hit 100 units sold in a quarter, and a dealer might earn $1,000 per unit. Cross 200 units, and that bonus can jump to $3,000 per unit, applied retroactively across every single truck sold that quarter, not just the ones past the threshold. This is exactly why a dealer will sometimes sell one truck at a razor-thin margin, or even at a small loss, right before the quarter closes. That single unprofitable sale can be the exact unit that pushes the dealership over a bonus tier worth millions of dollars across the entire lot. Manufacturers sweeten the relationship even further by subsidizing local advertising, funding technician training programs, and contributing toward facility upgrades. On paper, these look like gifts. In practice, they're strategic. A better trained technician sells more repair hours. A well-funded local ad campaign sells more trucks bearing that manufacturer's badge. Every dollar the manufacturer hands over is really an investment in keeping its own brand competitive in that dealer's territory, not generosity for its own sake. Of course, none of this is immune to the wider economy. Truck sales are tied directly to freight demand, and freight demand rises and falls with everything from fuel prices to construction activity to interest rates. When freight slows down, trucking companies stop ordering new equipment almost immediately. Unsold inventory piles up on the lot, floor plan interest costs start eating into cash reserves, and used truck values can drop sharply, forcing painful inventory write-downs. On paper, every one of these pressures hits at exactly the same time, which is what makes a freight recession feel so sudden from the inside. Sounds like a business in serious trouble. Well, almost, because there's a strange silver lining hidden inside that downturn. When fleets stop buying new trucks, they don't stop hauling freight, they just keep running their older trucks for longer than planned. And older, higher mileage trucks break down more often. That sends a wave of high-margin repair work straight into the service bays and the parts counter, right at the exact moment new truck sales are drying up. The two halves of the business move in opposite directions, which is precisely why a well-run dealership rarely collapses just because new sales slow down for a year or two. But real risks do exist, and they can genuinely undo a dealership that isn't managed carefully. The industry has a persistent, well-documented shortage of certified diesel technicians, which means a dealership can physically build 30 service bays and still only be able to staff 15 of them, cutting its single most profitable department roughly in half through no fault of its own. Most truck inventory sits on variable rate floor plan debt, so when interest rates climb sharply, the daily cost of simply owning unsold trucks climbs right alongside it, squeezing cash flow from every direction at once. Manufacturers also periodically issue new mandatory facility requirements, like electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and dealers either fund those expensive upgrades or risk losing their franchise entirely. And warranty reimbursements from manufacturers aren't automatic or guaranteed. Disputes over what counts as an approved repair, or how many labor hours a job should have taken, can leave a dealership waiting months for money it's already spent out of its own pocket. There's also a softer risk that rarely gets talked about, tied to customer satisfaction scores. Manufacturers track how happy buyers are with the sales process, the delivery experience, and the service department, and they attach real quarterly cash bonuses to those scores. A dealership can do everything right financially and still lose a meaningful bonus payout because of a handful of frustrated survey responses, which pushes owners to invest heavily in training and customer experience even in departments that don't look profitable on paper. So what actually separates a dealership that quietly struggles from one that becomes genuinely wealthy? Scale is a huge part of the answer. The largest operating groups, running well over 100 locations, negotiate far better pricing on parts and spread their administrative costs across a much wider base of stores. Many build centralized regional parts hubs that supply smaller local stores nearby, which keeps popular components in stock and dramatically cuts down on the number of times a customer walks away because the shelf was empty. Some of the strongest groups go a step further and build a hub-and-spoke system, where one large regional warehouse stocks the full range of parts and feeds smaller local stores as needed throughout the week. That structure means a small dealership 50 miles from the hub can still promise a customer a same-day part without having to carry the full cost of stocking every possible component itself. The smaller store gets the speed of a fully stocked shelf without the capital burden of actually owning one. The strongest operators also keep expanding sideways into services that look unrelated to selling trucks but quietly reinforce everything else. Mobile repair trucks that drive out to a stranded fleet on the highway. Trailer repair bays running alongside the truck service bays. Custom body and equipment fabrication for construction or utility customers. None of these show up in the headline truck sales number, but each one deepens the relationship with a fleet customer and makes it that much harder for them to ever leave. But more than anything else, it comes down to protecting that absorption rate as if it were sacred. The dealerships that treat a fully covered fixed cost structure as the bare minimum, not the goal, are the ones that stay solidly profitable no matter what new truck sales happen to be doing in any given year. Let's put actual numbers on the two ways this can go, because that's really the honest way to end this. In a genuinely good year, with fleet buying strong and interest rates stable, a mid-sized dealership might generate around $15 million in combined gross profit across sales, service, parts, and financing, against roughly $10 million in fixed overhead, leaving a net profit somewhere around $5 million. In a rough year, with freight demand down, floor plan rates elevated, and unsold inventory piling up, that same dealership might see gross profit fall to around $9 million against the same $10 million in fixed costs, landing on a net loss of roughly $1 million. The difference between a good year and a bad year at that dealership is about $6 million, and almost none of that swing comes from the showroom. It comes from what happens in the bays and behind the finance office door, which brings us back to where we started. A commercial truck dealership isn't really a truck selling business at all. It's a lender, quietly brokering loans and pocketing the spread. It's a regional parts distributor, running its own supply chain behind the counter. It's a specialized repair shop, billing at a rate its own technicians rarely see a cent of. And it's a long-term logistics partner to every fleet that signs with it, one that keeps generating revenue for years after the original truck has already left the building. The truck itself leaves the lot exactly once. If the dealership behind it is run well, that single truck keeps quietly paying rent in that building for the next decade. Before we wrap up, if you want a deeper practical breakdown of how businesses like this actually make their money behind the scenes, there's a detailed business guide linked in the description and pinned in the comments below. It's genuinely worth checking out if this kind of thing interests you. And that's the real story behind the showroom. If you enjoyed this one, do us a favor and like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and share it with someone who'd find this just as interesting as you did. Thanks so much for watching.